evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Schortgen. I'm in the Department of Political Science and International Studies. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the pro-democracy protests that have been going on for just about 2 weeks now, on and off in Hong Kong. Demonstrations that at the moment show no signs of really abating just yet. What I wanted to do in this presentation is to sort of shed a little bit more light on why we are where we are at right now, what led up to this. And let me begin with, everybody has heard about it in the news right now. It's being talked about in the print media and the TV media. People are talking about who is demonstrating. It's mostly students. How they're demonstrating is still largely peaceful. They're going about it in unexpected ways. They're not overly confrontational, so much so that actually at one of the more recent clashes where tear gas was flying, the students afterwards went back to the streets and actually ended up cleaning up, taking the bottles for recycling and so on. So it's kind of a controlled demonstration, if you will. And of course we've heard quite a bit about how the Hong Kong government is trying to navigate the current crisis. So the fact that it is big time in the news should really put Hong Kong on the radar screen. And I think 1 year would be enough for the most trusted name in news, CNN, to finally figure out where Hong Kong really is located. This is about a year ago, October 3rd, 2013, when they ran the story about the giant hornets killing people in China. Of course, no, it's slightly wrong. So hopefully by now everybody knows where it really is. Just in case, of course, Hong Kong is in the southern portion of China. Here's a slightly blown up version. That's the whole territory of Hong Kong we're talking about. And here's a nice view if you ever happen to go to Hong Kong, or if you have been there. Victoria Peak is one place you really would want to go on a good day. And there are not too many of those because Hong Kong has a lot of air pollution. But this is a really good day. You see the whole Victoria Harbour here, Hong Kong Island, Kowloon, and the new territories. The big question that seems to be on everybody's mind, and this is always interesting to ask in hindsight, were these demonstrations really inevitable? Were they just bound to happen? Well, that's kind of what I want to shed some light on today. And how am I going to do that? Well, let's start with the real dramatic or alarmist prediction that some seem to entertain, although this has not gotten a lot of play, luckily, just yet. But it would not be out of the realm of possibility for some people to ask whether or not Hong Kong would sort of witness a Tiananmen Square 2.0 at some point. Not that I would say that that's going to happen, okay? But in order to actually understand, what might happen in the future, well, we have to really understand where we're at today, why these demonstrations are happening, and in order to answer that question, you kind of have to take a little stroll down memory lane, so to speak, go a little bit back in history, and see where we're coming from. The next slide that I will show you will give you a little bit of a glimpse of the history of Hong Kong. And I'm going to run roughshod over that history. That's also the one slide where the print is actually quite small, so I'm pretty sure you won't be able to read this one, but that was the only way to get all the info in. If we take a historical perspective, the first thing you might ask is, well, where do we really start? I chose to sort of differentiate between the colonial and post-colonial era in Hong Kong, which seems to make a lot of sense. And in order to start, why don't we start, well, this is really not clear, in 1842. 1842 marked the end of the First Opium War. China experienced 2 of those. And at the end of the First Opium War, the way the war was settled in the favor of Britain was that China agreed to cede Hong Kong Island to the British. And in the aftermath of the Second Opium War and close to the end of the 19th century, in 1898, China agreed to lease the new territories and 235 outlying islands of Hong Kong to Britain for a total of 99 years. So the whole due date of reversion back to Hong Kong was July 1st, 1997. What are the new territories? Well, if in 1842 the British got this portion of Hong Kong, in 1898 you end up getting all of this. And this was really, in the end, to be given back on July 1st, 1997. I'm going to fast forward very quickly here to the late 20th century. In 1982, the Chinese and the British began negotiations on the process of how to return Hong Kong to Chinese rule. The negotiations lasted for about 2 years, and in 1984, the British and Chinese government came out with a joint declaration that would spell out the process under which Hong Kong would revert back to Chinese rule, and it was to be done under the umbrella of what the Chinese government had called one country, two systems. A formulation that was attributed to the then Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping, and the idea was that once Hong Kong gets to be back, reincorporated into China, the Chinese would not meddle with the capitalist or the prevailing political system for at least 50 years. So nothing really would change. Well, and then 1989 happened. Tiananmen Square, when the Chinese government cracked down on pro-democracy protests in Beijing, although there was a little bit more to that than just pure pro-democracy protests. It's usually depicted as such in the Western press, but there was a much bigger story. But be that as it may, those demonstrations raised a lot of concern about what the future of Hong Kong might entail. Once Hong Kong is back under Chinese rule, would the Chinese government really honor the terms of that one country, two systems deal? And what you saw in the aftermath of Tiananmen Square was there was a gradual exodus of people from Hong Kong. Or at the very least, some people also applied for dual citizenship to sort of hedge their bets. A lot of them who did leave, they ended up in Canada, primarily in the Vancouver area, and partly in the United States as well. In 1992, the last British governor of Hong Kong steps foot on Hong Kong soil. His name was Chris Patten, and within a couple of months he managed the, well, not so impossible feat of just really angering the Chinese government, because he floated the proposal for economic reform of the Hong Kong institutions, and the goal was to broaden the voting base for elections in the future. Not, of course, a message that would sit very well with the Chinese government. In 1997, now we're at the critical stage. The night of June 30th to July 1st, that's a night I remember very vividly because that's my first exposure to Hong Kong, because I was in Hong Kong at that time, a little bit by accident. I didn't exactly plan it that way. I had spent 6 weeks traveling in China with my mentor and other students on a study tour, and we were encouraged to sort of explore the region on our own afterwards. And I happened to have friends in Hong Kong and Singapore, so I thought it's a great time to explore those places. And I just happened to arrive in Hong Kong a couple of days before the end of British colonial rule, and I was going to be there the first couple of days of Chinese rule. So on the night of June 30th to July 1st, I was actually in Victoria Harbour, one of the many boats that littered the harbour to see the fireworks, which I didn't get to see because it was overcast and rainy, so you probably saw more on TV than I did actually being there. But at least I had the opportunity to sort of go through that historic moment. You could see quite a bit of euphoria at first, also some anxiety, but it can never really forget the image when I saw the Hong Kong police after midnight sort of taking off the British insignia and putting on the Chinese insignia. I mean, it really was a momentous event. And then, of course, the Chinese hand-picked the first successor to the British governor, Chris Patten, and his name was Tong Xihua, a guy who had no political experience whatsoever. He was a shipping tycoon, pro-China, so he was naturally picked by the Chinese authorities to run the territory of Hong Kong, which now is officially referred to as the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, sort of paying lip service to the idea of one country, two systems. It's administered in a very special way, different from mainland China. In 2002, Mr. Tang Xihua came up with a very controversial proposal that really raised the attention of the people of Hong Kong. He wanted to push through a very controversial anti-subversion law that would basically restrict certain freedoms of expression. That's, of course, again, not something that the Hong Kong people would take lightly. That led to demonstrations in 2003, and that law, known as Article 23, was shelved indefinitely. Well, a couple of years later, in 2004, the Chinese came up with a new idea. They said, well, any changes to Hong Kong election laws in the future, they will only be done if they have met with the approval of Beijing. And that was sort of to guarantee that China would always have a veto over extending true democracy over the territory. 2007 was a more optimistic moment, because at this time the Chinese government promised that they would extend universal suffrage to the people of Hong Kong so that they could choose freely their own leader, the chief executive, that's the title of the leader of Hong Kong, by 2017. And they could freely choose members of the Legislative Council, which is their main legislature, by the year 2020. The then chief executive of Hong Kong, a former British colonial consultant by the name of Mr. Donald Tsang, basically hailed this decision as a timetable to eventual universal suffrage. Sounded like a good idea, but the people in Hong Kong were still not satisfied. For them, it was too far into the future. So some demonstrations still happened as a result of that. And then we get to this year. In June of 2014, there was an unofficial referendum that was conducted in Hong Kong involving about 800,000 people. More than 90% of those people in that referendum basically voted in favor of giving the public, so everybody in Hong Kong, the right to determine who the slate of candidates for chief executive would be. So really giving them the complete opportunity to decide for themselves who they are going to elect. Well, in July of 2014, we had some demonstrations to really drive home that point that yes, people in Hong Kong really want this. The message was to be sent to Beijing. In August of 2014, and this is where the rubber meets the road, because now the Chinese government is saying, well, this promise that we made in 2007 to give you a universal suffrage by 2017, we're going to change it a little bit. And the change came in the form that, well, it's not really full-blown universal suffrage. We will give you a slate of candidates to choose from, and then you can freely choose from any of those. So basically what we're doing is we're taking away the right to freely vet your own candidates. And of course Beijing would only select candidates who have very pro-Beijing inclinations. And that's what really got the ball rolling. Because now, in September, you have seen pro-democracy movements that really haven't fully abated just yet. What also really irked the people of Hong Kong was a statement by Li Fei, who is the chair of the nomination committee for those candidates that could stand for election to the office of chief executive. He's a very prominent member of China's National People's Congress. He was sent to Hong Kong, and on September 1st he gave a press conference in which he outlined the decision, or the rationale behind the decision to take away the right to freely vet your own candidates. And apparently it was done because the goal of the nomination committee was to minimize the risks that are involved in universal suffrage. The decision that Beijing would present you with, like here are a couple of candidates, That's a much better approach, he argued, because what it does is it reduces the risk of political confrontation. Of course, it seems like the exact opposite has happened. It would cut the risk of a constitutional crisis. And exactly the opposite of that has happened, because we are now in a constitutional crisis. People are looking at the mini constitution that Hong Kong has, known as the Basic Law, and people are saying, you know, we're not being given the freedom. You're meddling in our internal affairs way before the year 2047, at which time Hong Kong would be completely under China's thumb. And last but not least, the whole idea would minimize the risk of populism. And of course, if that's what ought to be happening, well, you know, we should really have any demonstrations. Everybody should just take it in stride and then go on with their own business. He justified this by saying that anyone who does not love the country or love Hong Kong or is confrontational towards the central government, i.e. Beijing, shall not be the chief executive. So if you have any sort of more controversial perspectives about Beijing, you won't even be considered as a viable candidate. Those who wish Hong Kong will become an independent political entity or will change the country's socialist system will not have a political future. It's literally, with that statement, basically sending the message that this real democracy, you're not going to get it. Because at the end of the day, the message that was put out also in a white paper that the Chinese government published on Hong Kong was that the high degree of autonomy that Hong Kong currently enjoys, that's really at the discretion of the Chinese government. And we can give you more autonomy or we can give you less autonomy. It just depends on how we feel you behave or how much you are in line with our objectives. I use this term, which reads Kleping Fajian, which means peaceful development. So what's the big difference? Well, it's not a huge difference. It's just, you know, went from rise to development. Why? Because the fear was still that the term rise would still be perceived as too aggressive in the eyes of the rest of the world. So whereas development sounds a lot more benign. So this really shows that China is very concerned and cares very much about its public image, and it's not about to risk it over Hong Kong. I would not see that happen. And the other reason for that would be, well, Hong Kong enjoys a particular status. It's a major international financial center, if not the dominant one in Asia. If you look at the top 10 in Asia, even as late as 2014, by IPO volume, initial public offerings, Hong Kong overshadows everybody else in the region. Financial markets do not like political uncertainty or instability. Okay? If the Chinese government were to really up the ante and crack down much more harshly, it would send a ripple effect through the financial markets. And that they usually react to that in several ways. And one of them would be that investors would say, oh, well, it's time to take the money out of Hong Kong. As the demonstrations have already been playing out, there has already been an indication that some investors are looking for alternative sites. And one of the most obvious ones for them has always, for the longest time, has been the city-state of Singapore. There's also the possibility of multinational companies. A lot of them have their regional headquarters in Hong Kong. If there's more political instability or uncertainty, questions about how much the Chinese government is committed to upholding the rule of law, that might compel some of those companies to say, you know what, we're out of here. And some of them already have done that, even way before these demonstrations have happened. There's always competition between cities around the region to attract multinational companies. Some have gone and set up shop in mainland China. For the longest time, Hong Kong was seen as the gateway into mainland China. Well, now a much better one would be to set up shop in Shanghai right away. Others have actually moved further away from China and set up shop in Singapore. And to give you an idea of how fickle the financial markets could be, and this is not a very good indication about the long-term trend. because it would take a long time for Hong Kong to lose its international financial center status. But if you look at the stock market, this is a chart. Whoa, cannot really see that. It's going to be too light in here. The Hang Seng Index. What you would see is this is around September when the demonstration started, and the trend is decidedly downwards. At the same time, the city of Shanghai, the Shanghai Composite Index, if you look at September roughly, it's decidedly upwards. So Shanghai has already gained a little bit at the expense of Hong Kong. It's got a long way to go to close the gap, but that's the concern that China has to take into account. It does not want to send the message that Hong Kong is no longer as safe for business as it used to be, because it had that very high reputation. The one dimension that really is not talked about at all, or if it is, it's just in passing, and that's a very critical one from the perspective of China, is whatever happens in Hong Kong, how they manage the demonstrations will be interpreted accordingly in Taiwan, which is not too far away from Hong Kong. Hong Kong is right about here, because the one country, two systems formula was not just specifically designed to get Hong Kong back. It was designed to get 3 places back. And those 3 places, once China gets them back, they would effectively close the proverbial chapter in the history books that is usually known as the century of humiliation. Humiliation at the hands of foreign powers, occupation, defeat in war, and so on, going back to the 19th century. The 3 places that the one country, two systems formula was designed to attract were Hong Kong, and it got that one back in 1997, July 1st, as we just mentioned. Macau, former Portuguese colony, about an hour by speedboat away from Hong Kong. So if Hong Kong is here, the other one is right on the other side of this little bubble there. China got Macau back on December 20th, 1999. But the big prize always has been and always will be Taiwan, a region that China has historically seen as sort of the renegade province. Because Taiwan is not an independent sovereign country, and the Chinese would raise heaven and earth if they wanted to go independent. It has historically been and always will be Chinese territory. It's just not within their control at the moment. And the idea was, look, if we can give the impression that the one country, two systems formula is something we're committed to, and it works well in Hong Kong, if it works well in Macau, it might be just what the doctor ordered, so to speak, to convince Taiwan that, yeah, maybe we should, get closer to China. And we have seen a lot of rapprochement between Taiwan and mainland China. We have now again direct shipping links and direct air travel, which for the longest time you couldn't. If you wanted to fly from Taiwan to, say, Shanghai, you couldn't just get on a flight in Taipei and then fly up here. You had to go probably to Hong Kong and then fly to Shanghai. That has all changed. So the way the Chinese government will handle affairs in Hong Kong will be interpreted accordingly in Taiwan, and they will readjust their own policy accordingly. Whoops. And the biggest problem, if China mismanages the Hong Kong crisis, it would have to pay a big price within the next year, because there will be legislative elections in Taiwan in 2015, and there will be presidential elections in 2016. If this crisis gets bungled, there could be the possibility of more of an independence movement, an independence party, which they have in Taiwan, to field a candidate who may or may not attract a lot of votes, and then China has a much bigger problem on its hands. So either way you put it, the crisis in Hong Kong right now couldn't really come at the worst moment for China, and especially for its leader, Xi Jinping, because it puts him literally between the proverbial rock and a hard place. And it takes a lot of finesse to manage that crisis. at the end of the day, the political fortunes of Xi Jinping sort of hang in the balance. And he is a leader who has really solidified his power. He's been in power for just about 2 years now, but he is undoubtedly the most powerful Chinese leader since Deng Xiaoping. He has a very personalized leadership style. And the Economist nicely put it here, Xi who must be obeyed. He has made a lot of enemies in the last couple of years because he's on a very aggressive anti-corruption drive. And yes, corruption is a huge problem in China, but he also probably uses this to take out his political opponents, sideline them, or throw them in jail. And if the ones that are sidelined, they would jump at any opportunity they could get to get back at Xi Jinping. So managing that crisis is very important. It's highly, the political imperative of getting Hong Kong right is absolutely critical for Xi Jinping. Other people might have said, well, yes, if you don't manage the crisis very well, if you let the demonstrations go on endlessly, what about the potential spillover into mainland China? Because we have seen quite a bit of uprisings over the years. The Chinese call them the mass incidents. They have been about 85,000 in 2005, and then they stopped actually reporting the numbers, and the statistics are no longer available. There are a number of mass demonstrations. Now imagine how it would play if the Chinese government said, oh, Hong Kong, yeah, okay, well, you're really different, so you just do whatever you want. We don't really crack down at all. Would there be a possibility of that sort of galvanizing more opposition in China? It's not out of the realm of possibility, but at the moment there's one thing that works in Xi Jinping's favor. There's a very strong wave of nationalism in China, and that he has cultivated with sort of great skill. That could very well detract from the crisis in Hong Kong. And there are a lot of people in Hong Kong, in mainland China, who would say, you know, the people in Hong Kong, you guys are all spoiled children. You don't know how well or how good off you are, and so on. So there's not a lot of real connection, if you will, between the ideas of the people in Hong Kong and mainland China just yet. That doesn't mean that the spillover effect couldn't happen in the future. For Xi Jinping, the other big test is he's still going to be in power for about 3 years, and then we have the 19th Party Congress. He's on track to be the leader for another 5 years after that. And then we have 2022, 20th Party Congress. He will have to move out because they have a mandatory retirement age now. If that whole issue about universal suffrage in Hong Kong isn't fully resolved, that may create more problems down the road. But he has to find a way to placate both sides without also risking the status of Hong Kong in the eyes of the Western camp. So it's a very dicey game he has to play. But I do not think for a moment that the Chinese government would at this point even consider really harshly cracking down. Look at the one demonstration that we had that got a little out of hand. It was only tear gas that was flying on one hand, and what did the students have? Umbrellas. They call it the umbrella revolution, actually. Partly to shield them from the rain and the tear gas and the pepper spray and so on. There hasn't been any real overt confrontation. The day after that confrontation, the security presence was noticeably more low-key, to just give the impression to Hong Kong people that, look, we're not really looking for confrontation. It will be a true test for both the Hong Kong government and the Chinese government in the weeks, maybe months ahead. But I do not see sort of the full-blown repeat of Tiananmen Square. I don't think that's in the cards.